Why did Henry Kissinger, a man with no army, no fortune, no throne, control American foreign policy for decades while presidents came and went? The shocking truth: 73% of Fortune 500 CEOs credit their rise not to charisma or credentials, but to becoming indispensable behind the scenes before anyone noticed their names. Here's what they discovered that you haven't. Real power isn't taken. It's inherited by those who make themselves so essential that their removal would collapse the system itself. While everyone fights for the spotlight, the truly dangerous acquire influence like carbon monoxide, odorless, invisible, and by the time you realize it's there, it has already taken control. The person who holds the real power in any room isn't the one making noise, it's the one everyone forgot was even listening. Chapter 1. Power doesn't announce itself. When Niccolò Machiavelli penned The Prince in 1513, locked away in his villa after political exile, he wasn't writing a manual for tyrants. He was documenting the art of influence that operates below conscious awareness. The most enduring forms of power embed themselves so deeply into daily operations that their removal would cause systemic collapse. Consider the modern corporate ecosystem. The person wielding the most influence isn't always the CEO making headlines. It's often the systems architect who designed the workflow everyone depends on, or the analyst whose reports shape every major decision. These individuals have achieved what Machiavelli called necessary authority. They've made themselves indispensable through strategic positioning. This principle extends beyond organizational hierarchies. In creative collaborations, academic institutions, even social groups, the most influential members control information flow, facilitate connections, or solve problems others can't articulate. They operate like the circulatory system of a body, invisible until severed, but absolutely vital for survival. The psychology behind this phenomenon is rooted in what researchers call systemic dependence. When someone consistently provides irreplaceable value, they create what economists term switching costs. The effort required to function without them becomes so high that their position becomes unassailable. Machiavelli understood that announced power invites resistance, while embedded power invites reliance. The moment you declare your importance, you paint a target on your influence. But when you weave yourself into essential operations, when your absence would create chaos, you achieve something far more valuable than recognition. You achieve inevitability. This is the foundation upon which all invisible influence rests. Chapter 2. Machiavelli's Marginal Wisdom. The conventional interpretation of Machiavellian strategy focuses on the dramatic, bold moves, calculated betrayals, public displays of strength. But scholars who've studied Machiavelli's private correspondence reveal a different pattern. His most successful maneuvers happened in the margins, through seemingly minor adjustments that created cascading effects throughout entire political systems. During his tenure as Florentine diplomat, Machiavelli rarely secured victories through direct confrontation. Instead, he positioned himself as the person who could solve problems others couldn't see coming. He'd identify structural weaknesses in political alliances before they became crises, then quietly position Florence to benefit from the inevitable reshuffling. His influence came not from commanding armies, but from being the person leaders called when they needed someone who understood power's deeper currents. This marginal wisdom operates on a simple principle. Major changes in complex systems often result from minor inputs applied at precisely the right leverage points. Modern complexity theory calls this sensitive dependence on initial conditions, but Machiavelli was practicing it centuries before scientists had a name for it. In contemporary contexts, this translates to identifying small, unglamorous tasks that have disproportionate impact on larger outcomes. The person who controls meeting agendas shapes what gets discussed. The individual who manages information distribution influences what others know and when. The team member who documents processes becomes institutional memory others depend on. These positions of marginal influence are overlooked precisely because they seem insignificant. Most people chase visible markers of status, titles, corner offices, speaking opportunities, but these external symbols are also externs, all vulnerabilities. True Machiavellian positioning involves securing influence that cannot be easily transferred or replicated. Chapter 3. You don't need a title. You need gravity. Titles are announcements. Gravity is physics. When you walk into a room and people naturally orient themselves around your presence, not because they have to, but because something in the social dynamics pulls them toward your perspective, you've achieved something far more powerful than any formal designation could provide. Gravitational influence operates through what social psychologists call referent power, the ability to attract others through perceived expertise, reliability, or unique value proposition. Unlike positional authority, which depends on organizational charts, gravitational influence is self-sustaining. It grows stronger the more it's used, rather than depleting through exercise. The mechanics of building gravity are counterintuitive. Most people try to establish influence by broadcasting capabilities, listing achievements, or claiming expertise. But gravitational influence works in reverse. It pulls others toward you by creating value they can't easily find elsewhere. You become the person others seek out, not the person who seeks attention. Consider the colleague who consistently offers insights that shift everyone's understanding of complex problems. They don't need to announce their intelligence. Their perspective speaks for itself. Or the team member who reliably delivers solutions others couldn't imagine. Their competence creates its own magnetic field, drawing resources, opportunities, and influence naturally. This gravitational effect intensifies through what complexity theorists call preferential attachment, the tendency for well-connected nodes to attract even more connections. Once you become known as someone who adds unique value, people bring their challenges to you proactively. Each successful intervention strengthens your reputation, creating an upward spiral of influence that becomes both powerful and protected. Chapter 4. Let others build your armor. The most sophisticated form of protection isn't armor you wear. It's armor others insist on providing. When people become invested in your success, they transform from potential threats into active defenders. This is Machiavelli's most counterintuitive insight. True security comes not from defending yourself, but from making others dependent on defending you. Consider how this manifests in corporate environments. The person who becomes indispensable isn't the one hoarding information or building walls around their work. Instead, they systematically create situations where others benefit from their success. They share credit generously, provide opportunities for colleagues to shine, and position themselves as enablers rather than competitors. This creates what game theorists call aligned incentives, when your success becomes prerequisite for others' achievements. The psychology behind this is rooted in what researchers term psychological ownership. When people feel they've contributed to building something, they become emotionally invested in its preservation. By allowing others to participate in your rise, letting them suggest improvements, giving them roles in your projects, acknowledging their contributions publicly, you create a network of stakeholders who have skin in your success. This strategy extends beyond immediate colleagues. The most masterful practitioners cultivate what intelligence professionals call unwitting assets, people who support your objectives without necessarily understanding the full scope of your agenda. A mentor who introduces you to key contacts because they believe in your potential. A rival who inadvertently validates your expertise by seeking your input on complex problems. Subordinates who become fierce advocates because you've genuinely improved their working conditions. The genius of this approach is that it creates protection that scales exponentially. Each person who benefits from your success becomes a sensor in your early warning system, alerting you to threats and opportunities. They become advocates who speak positively about your work when you're not in the room. Most importantly, they become shields, because attacking you requires going through people who have legitimate reasons to defend you. Chapter 5. Move without shaking the floor. Earthquake scientists measure seismic activity on the Richter scale, where each whole number represents a tenfold increase in amplitude. But the most dangerous geological events aren't the dramatic earthquakes that everyone feels. They're the subtle shifts that happen over years, gradually weakening foundations until a minor tremor causes catastrophic collapse. Master strategists operate by the same principle. They create massive structural changes through movements so gradual that nobody registers the threat until it's too late. This requires understanding what psychologists call change blindness, the human tendency to overlook gradual modifications to familiar environments. People notice dramatic shifts immediately and instinctively resist them, but incremental changes that occur over extended periods often pass completely undetected, even when their cumulative effect is revolutionary. The tactical application involves what military strategists term salami tactics, achieving large objectives through a series of small actions, each reasonable in isolation but devastating in aggregate. You don't request expanded authority, you simply begin handling tasks that others are neglecting. You don't announce new alliances. You gradually increase collaboration with key stakeholders until the relationships become institutionalized. You don't demand resources. You demonstrate value consistently until additional support flows naturally. Consider how Netflix transformed from DVD delivery to streaming giant. They didn't announce their intention to destroy traditional television. They simply offered a slightly better alternative to video rental stores. Each incremental improvement, online ordering, streaming options, original content, seemed like logical business evolution. By the time competitors understood the existential threat, Netflix had and already captured the infrastructure and customer relationships necessary for market dominance. The same principle applies to personal influence. You don't declare your intention to become indispensable. You systematically identify problems that others find overwhelming and quietly solve them. You don't announce your expertise. You consistently provide insights that prove valuable. You don't demand respect. You earn it through reliable competence until deference becomes automatic. Moving without shaking the floor requires extraordinary patience and strategic discipline. You must resist the ego gratification that comes from dramatic gestures and public recognition. Chapter 6. Noise is not authority. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Authentic authority whispers and watches the world lean in to listen. This counterintuitive truth exposes one of the most persistent misconceptions about influence, the belief that commanding attention equals commanding respect. In reality, the relationship between volume and authority is inverse. True power speaks softly, precisely, because it doesn't need to shout. Psychological research on social dynamics reveals what's known as the quiet confidence effect. Studies by Harvard Business School show that individuals who speak less frequently, but with higher precision, are perceived as more competent, trustworthy, and influential than those who dominate conversations through volume or frequency. The brain interprets selective communication as evidence of careful thought and valuable insight. This principle extends beyond individual interactions to systemic influence. In organizational environments, the people who shape long-term direction are seldom those making the most noise in meetings. They're the ones who ask the questions others hadn't considered, who identify assumptions everyone else missed, who offer solutions after others have exhausted obvious approaches. Their influence comes not from broadcasting their opinions, but from demonstrating that their perspective adds unique value to complex problems. Consider the dynamics of high-stakes negotiations. Amateur negotiators often believe they must dominate the conversation, overwhelming opponents with arguments and demands. Professional negotiators understand that power lies in controlling the rhythm and direction of dialogue through strategic silence and precise intervention. They speak when their words can shift the entire framework of discussion, not when they merely have something to say. The most sophisticated practitioners of quiet authority understand that silence itself becomes a form of communication. When everyone else is scrambling to fill conversational voids with noise, your restraint becomes conspicuous. People begin paying closer attention to your rare contributions, knowing that when you do speak, it's worth hearing. This requires fundamental rewiring of ego gratification. Most people derive satisfaction from being heard. Masters of influence derive satisfaction from being understood. The former leads to noise. The latter leads to authority that resonates long after the conversation ends. Chapter 7. Be the structure, not the solution. Solutions are temporary. Structures are permanent. When you solve someone's immediate problem, they're grateful until the next crisis emerges. But when you create the framework that prevents problems from occurring, or better yet, turns problems into opportunities, you become essential to their continued success. This is the difference between being a service provider and being infrastructure. Infrastructure thinking operates on a different time horizon than problem solving. While others rush to address symptoms, you're architecting systems that eliminate root causes. While they're fighting fires, you're designing buildings that don't burn. This approach requires resisting the immediate gratification of being seen as the hero who saved the day, in favor of becoming the invisible foundation that prevents disasters from happening in the first place. The psychology behind this is rooted in what behavioral economists call loss aversion. People feel the pain of losing something they have more acutely than the pleasure of gaining something new. When you become structural to their operations, your removal doesn't just eliminate a benefit, it threatens their basic functioning. This creates what military strategists term strategic dependence. The target becomes invested in your success as prerequisite for their own stability. Consider the difference between being a consultant who's called in to solve specific problems versus being the architect who designs the systems that prevent those problems. The consultant has episodic value. The architect has systemic value. The consultant gets paid per project. The architect gets paid as long as the system operates. Most importantly, the consultant can be replaced by another expert. The architect cannot be replaced without rebuilding everything from the ground up. This structural positioning requires identifying the recurring patterns that create ongoing challenges, then designing elegant solutions that address entire categories of problems simultaneously. You become valuable not for your ability to work within existing constraints, but for your capacity to restructure those constraints in ways that create competitive advantages. The ultimate expression of structural influence is when your frameworks become adopted as standard operating procedures, your methods become institutionalized processes, and your insights become organizational wisdom. At that point, your influence persists even in your absence. Chapter 8. If you're starting to see the hidden architecture of power differently, you're exactly where you need to be. This isn't theory. This is the operating system that runs behind every major transformation, every quiet revolution, every rise that seemed to happen overnight, but actually took years of invisible positioning. Subscribe to curiosity to wisdom, because what comes next will fundamentally change how you think about influence, control, and inevitability. The real secrets haven't even been revealed yet. Chapter 9. Dominance. Disguised as service. The most elegant form of control is the kind that people beg you to exercise. When your authority feels like assistance, when your influence masquerades as support, when your dominance appears as indispensable service, you've achieved what Machiavelli considered the pinnacle of strategic positioning. You become powerful by making others dependent on your willingness to help them. This operates through what psychologists call instrumental dependency. People become reliant not just on your skills, but on your voluntary application of those skills for their benefit. Unlike coercive power, which generates resistance and resentment, service-based influence creates gratitude and loyalty. The target doesn't just comply with your agenda, they become invested in ensuring you remain willing to continue providing value. The mechanism is deceptively simple. Identify what others struggle with, then become exceptionally good at handling it for them. But the sophisticated application involves strategic selection of which problems to solve. You don't become a general problem solver. You become the exclusive solution to problems that are both critical and recurring. This creates what economists term monopolistic dependency. Others cannot easily find alternatives to your particular combinacci. Bond of expertise and availability. Consider the executive assistant who becomes indispensable not through administrative skills alone, but by developing an encyclopedic understanding of their executive's preferences, relationships, and strategic priorities. They don't just manage calendars, they anticipate needs, prevent conflicts, and facilitate opportunities that others couldn't even identify. Their influence extends far beyond their official role because their service has become integral to their executive's effectiveness. The psychology behind this is rooted in reciprocity principles and cognitive load reduction. When someone consistently reduces your mental burden while increasing your capability, they become associated in your mind with enhanced performance and reduced stress. Opposing them feels not just ungrateful, but counterproductive to your own interests. Service-based dominance requires suppressing ego gratification in favor of strategic patience. You must find satisfaction in others' dependence rather than their recognition. Chapter 10. Hunting gaps. Like water, finds cracks. Water doesn't force its way through stone. It finds the microscopic fissures and gradually expands them until the foundation crumbles. Strategic influence operates by the same principle. You don't assault established power structures directly. You identify the hairline fractures in existing systems and gently widen them until new possibilities emerge. Every organization, every social system, every power structure has gaps, spaces between official responsibilities, ambiguities in authority, problems that fall through bureaucratic cracks. While most people see these gaps as inconveniences or inefficiencies, masters of influence recognize them as opportunities for expansion. These undefined territories become the staging ground for invisible authority. The key is developing what intelligence analysts call gap recognition, the ability to perceive structural weaknesses that others overlook. This requires studying systems not just for what they accomplish, but for what they fail to address. Where do recurring problems emerge? What tasks does everyone assume someone else is handling? Which decisions get delayed because authority is unclear? These gaps represent vacuum spaces where influence can expand naturally. Consider how Amazon initially positioned itself not as a competitor to bookstores, but as a solution to gaps in book distribution. Titles that were difficult to find, out-of-print books, international shipping for specialized texts. They didn't challenge the core bookstore model initially. They filled spaces that traditional bookstores couldn't address efficiently. By the time established players recognized the threat, Amazon had occupied territory that was strategically critical, but previously ignored. The same principle applies to personal influence. You don't compete directly with established authorities. You identify the problems they're not solving, the connections they're not making, the opportunities they're not pursuing. You become valuable by handling what others can't or won't, gradually expanding your sphere of influence into territories that were previously unoccupied. This requires patience and careful observation. You must resist the impulse to announce your expansion and instead allow your growing influence to be discovered gradually by those who benefit from it. Chapter 11. Necessity trumps titles. When someone becomes essential to the basic functioning of a system, formal hierarchies become irrelevant. The person who controls what others need doesn't require official permission to exercise influence. Their indispensability grants them authority that transcends organizational charts. This is the ultimate expression of Machiavellian strategy, power that exists because it must, not because it was granted. The distinction between granted authority and necessary authority is crucial. Granted authority can be revoked by those who provided it. Necessary authority persists as long as the underlying dependency remains. A CEO can fire a vice president, but they cannot easily eliminate the person who designed the systems everyone depends on, who maintains the relationships that generate revenue, or who possesses the institutional knowledge required for daily operations. This principle operates through what systems theorists call critical path dependence. When specific individuals or processes become bottlenecks that determine the speed and success of larger operations. Unlike traditional bottlenecks, which are seen as problems to be solved, strategic bottlenecks are assets to be cultivated. You become the constraint that others must work around, which grants you significant influence over how they operate. The psychology behind this is rooted in loss aversion and sunk cost fallacies. Once people have invested time and resources in adapting to your methods, replacing you requires not just finding an alternative, but rebuilding entire workflows around different approaches. The switching costs become prohibitive, even if alternatives might theoretically be superior. Consider the software developer who becomes indispensable, not through superior coding skills, but by creating elegant solutions to complex integration problems that no one else fully understands. Their code becomes infrastructure that other systems depend on. Removing them doesn't just eliminate their future contributions, it risks destabilizing existing functionality that others have built around their work. Necessity-based authority requires identifying functions that are both critical and difficult to replicate. You must become excellent at things that others find challenging or tedious. Then systematically integrate your contributions into larger systems until your removal would cause disproportionate disruption. Chapter 12. Speak from assumed authority. The most powerful form of communication isn't requesting permission or seeking approval. It's speaking as if your authority were already established and your perspective were obviously valuable. This subtle shift in linguistic framing can transform how others perceive and respond to your contributions, often without them consciously recognizing the change. Assumed authority operates through what linguists call presupposition, embedding assumptions about status and expertise within the structure of your communication, rather than explicitly claiming them. Instead of saying, "I think we should consider," you say, "when we implement this approach." Instead of asking, "Would it be possible to," you suggest, "The optimal sequence would be." These subtle linguistic shifts signal confidence and competence without announcing them directly. The psychology behind this is rooted in social proof and authority bias. Humans are evolutionarily wired to defer to confident expertise, especially in complex or uncertain situations. When someone communicates with the implicit assumption that their perspective is valuable and their judgment is sound, others often unconsciously accept those assumptions unless they have specific reasons to challenge them. This requires careful calibration. Assumed authority must be backed by demonstrated competence, or it becomes transparent arrogance that generates resistance. The goal isn't to fake expertise you don't possess, but to communicate genuine insights with the confidence they deserve. Many capable people undermine their own influence by hedging, qualifying, or minimizing their contributions in ways that invite others to dismiss their value. Consider the difference between "I might be wrong, but maybe we could try," versus "based on similar situations, this approach typically yields better results." Both statements might reflect identical levels of actual certainty, but the second version positions the speaker as someone whose experience and judgment are worth considering seriously. The most sophisticated practitioners of assumed authority understand that confidence must be paired with intellectual humility. They speak decisively about areas where they have genuine expertise, while remaining genuinely curious about domains where others know more. Chapter 13. Make them miss you before you're gone. The ultimate test of invisible influence isn't whether people notice your presence. It's whether they feel your absence. True power reveals itself not in what you do when you're there, but in what stops working when you're not. This is the final principle of silent acquisition, engineering dependency so complete that your temporary withdrawal creates immediate, undeniable evidence of your essential value. Strategic absence operates through what psychologists call contrast effect, the human tendency to evaluate experiences relative to what preceded them. When someone consistently provides value, that value becomes normalized, taken for granted, absorbed into baseline expectations. But when that value suddenly disappears, even temporarily, the contrast becomes stark and painful. The absence creates awareness that presence had obscured. This requires sophisticated timing and emotional intelligence. The withdrawal must be long enough to generate genuine inconvenience, but brief enough to avoid permanent replacement. You're not abandoning your position, you're highlighting its importance through carefully calibrated scarcity. The goal is to create a brief crisis that demonstrates your worth without appearing manipulative or uncommitted. The most elegant applications involve legitimate reasons for temporary unavailability: vacation, training, special projects that require your full attention elsewhere. During these planned absences, you resist the urge to remain accessible or maintain involvement. You allow others to experience what operations look like without your usual contributions, interventions, and problem-solving capabilities. The psychology behind this is rooted in loss aversion and hedonic adaptation. People adapt to positive changes quickly, but they experience the removal of benefits as significant losses. When your absence forces others to handle problems they normally delegate to you, they gain visceral appreciation for the mental load and stress you typically absorb on their behalf. The revelation is profound. You discover who has been unconsciously relying on your capabilities, which systems depend on your involvement, and where your influence has become structurally integrated. Others discover the same thing. When you return, you're no longer just another team member. You're someone whose presence has proven materially beneficial to everyone's success and well-being. That recognition transforms future interactions fundamentally.